Prenups or prenuptial agreements don't always have the most positive connotation. While they are legal agreements entered into by couples before marriage, often to keep finances separate despite being otherwise legally joined, they can be a touchy subject for couples starting to build a life together. I mean, they always seem so damn dramatic in movies.
Prenuptial agreements! This contract is void!
I wish to execute a prenuptial agreement.
And I'm dead set against it.
But that stigma seems to be fading away. A new report from the Harris poll said that this year, 15% of US adults surveyed signed a prenup, which is up from just 3% in 2010. It also found that 35% of unmarried people say they are likely to sign a prenup in the future. To understand more about how prenups are used in contemporary relationships, let's take a look back at where they came from in the first place. In the Americas, prenups go back to 17th century Canada when French colonist men married women who came to the country with financial assistance from King Louis XIV. These women were so highly sought after that they were able to convince their husbands to sign prenups. This came at a time when men outnumbered women, so women had a leg up. Eventually, that gender ratio evened out and prenups went away. They got popular again in the US much later. A 1970 Florida case, Posner v. Posner, ruled that prenups should be a standard practice. One big possible factor in their usage today is the fact that millennials now have more debt than previous generations. One survey found that nearly 3/4 of millennials have over $100,000 in debt on average, not including mortgages. The most common debt is credit card debt, followed by student loans. There's also other ones to consider like medical debt and personal loans. Prenups can protect your partner from taking on your debt in the case of death or divorce. In some states, your spouse can be held accountable for all of your debt acquired during the marriage. Kelly Chang Rickard is a family law attorney in California who specializes in prenups, and she sees debt come up in divorce cases all the time.
In the case of credit card debt, which is also really prevalent, so it's not unusual for me to have a divorce where like one side has a Neiman Marcus card and charged up $70,000 and the other side never knew about it, but they are responsible for half the debt because it was acquired during the marriage.
But the breakdown of who's responsible for what differs from state to state. For instance, some states are community property states, meaning unless you sign a prenup, everything acquired during the marriage must be split 50-50. That's how things work in Arizona, California, Idaho, Louisiana, Nevada, New Mexico, Texas, Washington, and Wisconsin. In other states, laws differ. There can be different rules around what makes prenups enforceable. For example, in Connecticut, there's a specific window of time between when the prenup is presented and when the marriage happens for it to hold up. So it's important to see what your state requires beforehand. Another reason more people could be getting prenups is because they're getting married later in life and have more assets to protect coming into the marriage. According to Pew, in 2019, the average age a man first got married was 30. And for women, it was 28. That's 3 years later for both men and women compared to 2003, and 4 years later than in 1987.
I mean, these days, a lot of people work for themselves. And so if you're a social media influencer or you're an artist or you're a writer, a lot of people make money off their creative efforts. So like if they have a business coming into the marriage, a lot of them don't want to share that in case it doesn't work out.
This leads to the question of how finances are split. This determines what a prenup could look like. In the 1970s and 80s, it was common practice to put all your money into shared accounts with your spouse. But over the past several years, the number of married couples who keep some of their finances separate has risen. Experts say if couples have a joint account for things they share, they can opt to keep everything else separate, and in the case of divorce, they'll only have to worry about dividing the joint account. But it's important to note that separate accounts won't stay separate unless a prenup is signed stating that.
Even if you don't have a prenup, you kind of do. It's called the law. So if you don't have a prenup, you're just going by what your state law says. And California says community property. So your debt is my debt. That's what the state law says. So if you don't like that, then you should craft your own.
Kelly recommends getting a prenup ideally a year before your wedding. She also points out a few pros of prenups. For one, the stereotypical scenario we see in movies where a rich guy asks his fiancée to sign a prenup, it could actually be a good thing.
So if you were smart about it and the guy's like, I want you to sign a prenup saying, I don't want community, then what you could do is you can negotiate it. So you could be like, fine, I won't touch your stuff, But in lieu of that, I would like 50,000 a year, or 100,000 a year. And that way you can negotiate and you can actually get money by agreeing to sign a prenup.
There's also certain professions where it's strongly encouraged to protect the other person.
Definitely like lawyers or doctors, I think should always get prenups. Not just only because, it's my business, I don't want you taking half of it, but also it's a business that I can get sued on. So I would like to protect you from any lawsuits that I might get.
As prenups have become more common, we've seen people dig into this topic more on social media platforms like TikTok, for example. Kelly has an account of her own where she educates people on prenups to help break down myths and stigmas, including that they aren't just for rich people and not just in case of divorce. Now, we should note, we aren't necessarily seeing more divorces. CDC data shows that divorces declined between 2000 and 2020, but in the case of a divorce, not signing a prenup could really pile on to the cost of divorce, which can already be pretty high, costing between $15,000 and $20,000 on average. Let's go back to prenups that happen before a marriage. Experts say it's important to have conversations about finances with your partner early on to make sure both of you are comfortable going into it. Hello Prenup is a company that can help you navigate questions like what you would want to happen to your pets if you get divorced. This is something my wife and I have been joking about way too often. Or what property do you consider separate? We have with us Hello Prenup founder Julia Rogers. Julia, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
For starters, can you tell us a little bit more about why you started this company and what your process looks like when you're helping a client kind of work through some of these difficult questions?
I started Hello Prenup because I was a practicing attorney at the time. And I found that clients were really concerned about three key things. So one was timing. Everybody wanted their prenup done like yesterday. And when you hire an attorney, you need about 6 months to complete your agreement. Second, they wanted a more cost-effective solution. So lawyers can cost thousands of dollars. And I thought, how can I make this cheaper for people? And number three, couples wanted a more collaborative approach. So as you know, when you start a prenuptial agreement and you hire an attorney, you are usually hiring a divorce attorney, and nobody likes that. So that's where Hello Prenup came in. I started Hello Prenup. It is the first online platform that allows you to create your prenuptial agreement in hours instead of months, and for the fraction of the cost of hiring a traditional lawyer.
Aside from the issues that you mentioned earlier with timing, with the ability to collaborate, with how much it costs, what are some of the most common issues you see come up when couples are going through this process? So
a lot of times there's not much clarity around what assets should remain mine in a marriage and what will become marital. And those range from either property owned prior to the marriage, student debt that is really common for most millennials to go into marriage with, or future inheritance. And future inheritance is a really big one that we're seeing more often these days, as boomers are set to transfer about $60 trillion of wealth to their millennial and Gen Z children. They are more focused on ensuring that that wealth gets preserved, even in the event of a divorce.
One of the things that we cover in our segment is talking about the growing popularity, or how discussions around prenups are no longer taboo for certain generations. I'm kind of curious to know, considering your work in this field, why do you think prenups should be normalized?
I think that marriage is for the long haul, right? And in order to have a happy marriage, communication is key. Finances play a huge role in our lives. And so in order to communicate effectively throughout your marriage, in order to have a long and happy marriage, you need to be upfront about what those finances look like now and what you want them to look like in the future. So Really what all of this means is aligning on life goals. If your goal is to work really hard now and retire at the age of 40, then you need to have that discussion with your partner, because that is going to look very different from a partner who wants to, take 3 vacations a year, spend lavishly, and maybe never plans to retire. So these conversations are key to a long and healthy marriage. And that's why I think millennials are more willing to have them than any other generation before them.
Julia Rogers is the founder of Hello Prenup. Julia, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.